Hi everyone, welcome to CMN 201, and my name is Lillian Ruiz. I'm the instructor for the class, and what I wanted to do was just go through what it is we will be doing this semester, talking a little bit about our syllabus and about our course outline, and then we can begin in earnest next class. And if you note the top of our Moodle section, and I anticipate that you have already found our Moodle section because you are watching this video, you'll see that I've got at the top several folders that you can access. And what I'm trying to do is to duplicate as much as possible what would happen in a live class if we were meeting in person. And what I've done is I've listed a folder for syllabus and other documents, and that is going to list all of the handouts that I normally would have been including for this particular class. And that does include our syllabus and our course outline that I'm going to be talking about today. And I will be adding documents as the semester progresses. The due dates, I've got a section that just lists the due dates. Those are also included in our course outline and the syllabus and other documents folder. But if you just wanted to scan and see all of the due dates in one place so that you can plan, that's there. And I've also got past class sessions because what I'm going to be doing is keeping up each current week on our Moodle homepage. And then I will move the previous week into the folder, the past class session, so that you can access that throughout the entire semester. But I wanted it to be easy for you to be able to view that particular week. And basically, as I indicated, I'm trying to duplicate what we would do if we were meeting in class. And if we were meeting in class, we would be meeting on Wednesday evening from 6 to 8:50, actually. So what I'm going to be doing is posting videos much like this one every Wednesday by 6 o'clock. They may be posted earlier, but certainly by 6 o'clock. And that would give you an idea of the content that I would have talked about in the class. And then I'm also going to ask you to watch films. If we were meeting in person, then we would be watching those films together in class. And then I'm going to have a discussion forum questions about the films afterwards. And those discussion forum questions that you answer would duplicate the kind of class discussion that you would be having with your classmates if we were meeting live. And those discussion forum questions will count as attendance questions. So I'm not going to evaluate them. Basically, either you've responded or you haven't responded. And you'll notice that I like to ask questions that don't necessarily have a right or wrong answer, that just require thinking and reasoning, just to see how you are synthesizing some of the elements of the course as a whole. But I'll talk about this a little bit more in depth. And then you'll see that under that discussion forum section, I've got an optional chat. So if any of you wanted to get together independently and chat live, or you wanted me to chat live with you, we can access that link. I also have an optional Zoom so that it turns out if you wanted to meet with me via Zoom, this is my Zoom link, but certainly you can also contact me and I can provide that with you as well. So what I thought I would do, as I indicated, was to review that syllabus. And you can see that if you are looking at that syllabus now, it begins with my name, Lillian Ruiz. I'm pretty informal. Most people call me Lillian, but feel free to call me whatever you are comfortable with. My phone number is there. I'm teaching a combination of in-person and online classes. But if I'm not in my office, you can always leave a phone message. And my email is there, and you can see that my email is just my surname, Ruiz, R-U-I-Z, @gcc.mass.edu. And this goes to show the early days of GCC. I started in 1993. It's hard to believe how much time has elapsed. And we were just introducing email, and it goes to show how we didn't have enough foresight to think about the kind of technological changes that we would be confronting. Because at that point, basically, we never anticipated that we would need to use a first initial, believe it or not. My office, North 328A, which happens to be where the Inclusion and Diversity Center is located, and my office hours. So these are times that I should be in my office if you wanted to talk to me live. If I'm not there, there would be a note up because I'm at a meeting. That would be Monday through Thursday, 12 until 1, or of course by appointment. And you can make appointments to have conversations with me in any number of ways. We can have an appointment for a phone conversation, a Zoom conversation, a email conversation, a live person conversation. I want to try to be as accessible as possible. And my mailbox happens to be on the complete other side of the building from where my office is. It's a long story. That's South 321 Suite, if it turns out that you wanted to leave me anything. So textbooks. Now, what I've been trying to do with my online classes is to find links where I can get information that students get access. I have not been successful thus far with these particular texts, unfortunately, which means that you're going to either have to purchase them or borrow them, or I am also going to be placing them on reserve in the GCC library. And these 3 texts talk a little bit about horror film from an academic perspective, which is kind of unusual. One of the things we're going to talk about, it's something that is considered to be purely for entertainment or escapism, or sometimes even just for titillation. It can be also social commentary and can have literary and academic aspects associated with it. My training is in English. I'm an English professor, but I also teach, obviously, media and popular culture classes. I also teach personal communication classes, so I teach a little bit of everything. The first is entitled, textbook, Projected Fears, Horror Films in American Culture. Because again, this is a media and popular culture class, and this is how we're going to begin the semester next week, by the way, talking about what media is and what popular culture is. The next text is Nightmares in Red, White, and Blue. And you can probably figure out that this is going to be an examination of horror film in the United States, red, white, and blue being our colors of our country. And then Horror Film, A Critical Introduction by Leader. And I've got to note that it's assumed that students will have a good dictionary and thesaurus for reference. I assume you've got that loaded into your computer, but having access to it and actually using it are 2 different things. And you will be writing in this class as well as watching film in this class, which I'll talk about a little bit later. But let me go to the course description first, that this is an in-depth focus analysis of a specific theme or topic in mass media. And mass media, as we'll talk about next class, encompasses things like film, TV, print, music, and video games. Obviously, we're focusing on film. In order to examine social and cultural issues such as race, class, and gender. So it is possible to talk about the social tensions of our time through looking at popular culture. Each semester, the instructor selects the topic or the major theme of the course. And this semester, as it has been for several semesters, it's horror film. There is a prerequisite, English 101. In other words, that you have already learned how to formulate an argument, so that if you think that you haven't satisfied that requirement, please let me know, and I will be happy to talk about what options are available for you. It would be nice if you took Media and Popular Culture, CMN 153, at some point, whether it be before this class or after this class, but the 2 exist independently of one another. So I just finished teaching my Media and Popular Culture class, which was an introduction to what Media and Popular Culture is. I did that over the summer session. This is a more specialized class that's talking about horror film within media and popular culture. With my learning outcomes, as a result of successfully completing this course, students should be able to, 1, summarize scholarship of various mass media to understand mass media's academic relevance. So yes, there are scholars who've actually done scholarship on horror film. 2, recognize and articulate symbolic and metaphoric meanings in various mass media, so to improve critical thinking skills. And much like we discuss in English classes, oftentimes texts are representational, that they don't necessarily offer just the literal meaning, but they offer a suggested meaning. 3, identify and analyze the cultural significance of mass media, so to understand the influence of mass media in our society. And as I discuss in my Introduction to Mass Media class, we are all surrounded by mass media and we can't escape it. So we're all influenced by it. 4, gather and appraise examples of various mass media, so to identify some of the cultural and social anxieties in our society. And I think that's one of the most interesting ways to examine horror film, is that this is a representation of other fears that we have in our society. It might be presented literally as a monster, but figuratively or symbolically, it's about an other, something that is different from ourselves in our society, which we fear. Understand and draw connections between mass media and oneself, others, and society at large. So identify mass media's social, political, and cultural influence. So we'll talk about all three: social, political, and cultural influence, which means we also have to define what culture is. Evaluate and interpret data on the use of the popularity of various mass media, so to improve analytic skills. And that goes to show how something that is popular doesn't necessarily have to be dismissed as not being academic. And examine social issues like race and class and gender as they're portrayed in various mass media. Again, entertainment, but that entertainment oftentimes reflects our assumptions and our biases and our fears about our culture. So to better understand such issues in our society. So as I indicated for procedures, I'm trying to duplicate as much as possible as what I would do in an academic class. So I will post a video of myself discussing class material, much like this one, but the time our class would normally meet in person, and that's Wednesday at 6 p.m., though I'll try to do that beforehand. And then you have 48-hour deadline to watch the video for that class and answer the corresponding attendance question in our class discussion form. And do ask me for an extension if you need more time. I'll be happy to grant it to you. Your answer on the class discussion form is your attendance for that particular class. It's as if you were participating in that particular class and you were raising your hand. And then any additional interaction you have with your classmates, which is not required on the class discussion form, would be similar to participation in class, in a live class, as if you were raising your hand. So you don't necessarily have to respond to your classmates, because some people learn best by participating and some people learn best by listening. I don't think it's up to me to tell you how much or little to participate. That said, I do expect you to read all of your classmates' responses and my responses to all of those responses, because ultimately that will duplicate what it is that you would have heard in a live classroom situation. And then, again, as I indicated, that would just count as attendance, so to speak. There is no evaluation for that. And then any written assignments that we have that I'll talk about shortly, things like journals or papers or the final exam, and we will have all three, would be sent to my email, because that's what works best with my grading program. I ask that you send it to me via PDF. My grading program requires PDF. I will return the assignments to your email with my feedback. And generally, you're much like any other class, you're expected to complete all of the reading and writing assignments by the due dates. Students will submit periodic journal entries. These are informal written responses about the films that we're going to be watching over the course of the semester, discussing your reactions. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in the journal section. There will also be a final course project where at the ending of the semester, you get to decide to focus on a particular element associated with horror film. And I'll talk about that also in a few moments. And there also is a final exam. And the final exam is open book, open notes, essay exam. If we were meeting in class, you'd have approximately 2 to 3 hours to finish that final. We're not meeting in class, so when I post the final, basically, you would have 24 hours I would give you to do the final, but I wouldn't expect you to spend more than 2 or 3 hours at most on the final. Again, open book, open notes, where you're synthesizing everything that we've talked about over the course of the semester. There is a institutional services disability statement. So if you are a returning student to GCC, you probably are familiar with this, that GCC values inclusion and equal access to its programs and activities. It's committed to fostering an environment of respect and full participation. Our goal is to create learning environments that are equitable, inclusive, and welcoming. So if there are aspects of this instruction or the design of the course that result in barriers to your inclusion or accurate assessment or achievement, please notify me as soon as possible. And if you're a student with a disability and you need a reasonable academic accommodation, please contact the Office of Disability Services as soon as possible to discuss your needs and options. And you can see that I've given some contact information for that here. So those response journals that I was talking about, those informal responses of approximately a page or so for each of the films that we are going to be watching over the course of the semester. And you can see that I'm reading here from the syllabus where it says that the journals are meant as an opportunity for students to analyze the media, and that the guidelines will be very informal, and students should use the journals as an opportunity to explore in the way they feel would be most beneficial. Some suggestions will be given in class, and you might want to even follow up on one of the attendance questions and examine that more in depth. But on the whole, the journal should reflect any relevant thoughts or questions that you have about a particular form of media or that particular film. The journals also provide an excellent opportunity to brainstorm and free write project topics. And what I'm going to be doing as the semester progresses is giving you some possible topics to pursue for your final project. But those are just suggestions. You are free to create your own as long as you have it approved by me. Then ultimately you can pursue that. And I'll talk about the final project in a moment. Journals are graded informally. I'm not grading for grammar or mechanics. I'm grading for content. It's as if we were having a conversation on paper. So basically, that check mark system that I'll be using is a plus is excellent, a check plus is good, a check is satisfactory. There also is a less than satisfactory and an unsatisfactory. Late journals will lower your grade by 1 full grade. And no late journal will be submitted or accepted after 1 week has elapsed unless you've made other arrangements with me beforehand. So if you need an extension, please let me know and I'll be happy to grant it to you. And do submit journals via PDF to my email, Ruiz, R-U-I-Z, @gcc.mass.edu. And then I will put comments on it and return them back to you. And you can see in the attendance section here, even though we aren't a live class, that class activity and discussion is extremely important and can't be made up. So absences and tardiness will be negatively reflected in your participation grade. And while each case is different, anything more than 1 absence could lower your grade. And excessive absences could even result in failure. So you don't need to notify me that you're going to be absent for a particular class, but do speak with me if you are going to be missing several classes, or in other words, several discussion forum responses. And as I indicated, you can meet with me during office hours, or also you can make an appointment. So this final project, what is that about? This is an opportunity for you to examine something about horror film that is of interest to you. I'm selecting the readings that we read in class. I'm selecting the films that we're watching in class. But you get to choose a particular element about horror film and do that as a final course project. It'll be due at the very ending of the semester, so you've got the entire semester to work on it. I encourage you to begin thinking about it now. And the final project probably for most of you will be a written analysis of horror film. But there is room for more creative approaches. Keep in mind this is a media and popular culture class. So if you wanted to write, let's say, a script for a horror film, that could be something that we can negotiate. Of course, if you want to do something like that, the sooner you start, the better off you are. We'll start to talk about some guidelines in class as the semester progresses. I'm well aware I'm giving you a lot of information. I don't expect you to remember all of this. I just wanted you to be aware of the class holistically before we start to get into some of the details. And it is due on or before the last day of class. If you submit in early enough, I might be able to get it back to you with enough time for you to be able to revise. It just depends on when you submit that in. So that's an option for you to keep in the back of your mind. If you are going to submit in a paper, then the text should be pretty standard academic criteria following the MLA, the Modern Language Association format, which I'm hopeful that you talked about in your English 101 class, which I will also review briefly for you, that your text is typed and double spaced and has 1-inch borders. The pages are numbered. I am requesting a cover page, which is just something that includes a title. This is a separate sheet with a title, your name, the course and section number, my name, and the due date. Of course, you'd be doing that electronically. Submit the final course project, again, via PDF to my email. And the note that you may have the option to revise your graded project, subject to the permission of the instructor based on whether or not there's enough time for you to actually do a revision and for me to review it. Consult with me if you do think you want to revise. And if you did end up being able to revise, you would hand in the original project along with your revision, and you would get the higher of the 2 grades. So basically, it should be the revision grade. And there's a section on plagiarism that I'm going to skip and go to the grading section. These are approximate percentages. That 10% is participation, and that means attendance, that means answering the discussion forum questions, in-class assignments and activities, watching the films, things of that nature. 30% are those journals, those informal written responses of approximately a page or so that you're going to be doing for each film that we'll be viewing in class. 30% is that final course project that you are handing in by the ending of the semester about something about horror film that is of interest to you. It could be something that we've talked about in class, or it could be something that we didn't have a chance to talk about in class that you wanted to pursue. And 30% is the final exam, and that will be open book, open note, essay exam, where I will ask you to choose some essay questions and basically synthesize everything that we've talked about over the course of the semester. As I indicated, I'll give you 24 hours in which to respond to that essay exam. If we were meeting in person, you'd have approximately 2 to 3 hours. And the grading is A, excellent, B, good, C, satisfactory. And I'm not going to get to the other 2 letters. And I even have a criteria here for essay exam evaluation if you were going to hand in a final course project that is an academic paper. But I'll talk about that a little bit more as the semester progresses, about what qualifies as an A or a B or a C. What I wanted to do was to go to the course outline, and you will see that in the course outline, I have a couple of disclaimers. Dates and assignments might be subject to change, but basically what I've done is I've given you the entire semester, so you can begin planning now for what it is that we will be doing over the course of the semester. And that reading should be completed before the dates indicated below, because those are the readings that I'm going to be talking about at that date on that date in our class videos. And that the films listed may not all be available for free online. There is a copyright issue, especially with the more contemporary films. Whenever I can find the link, I will provide it with you. I will provide it for you. And certainly if I can't find the link and you find the link, if you could provide it to the class for free viewing, I would be very appreciative. But you may need, especially with the more contemporary films, to either rent, stream, purchase, or borrow some of these films. I will put these films on reserve in the GCC library, but do be aware of that, and I'll talk about what these films are in the next couple of minutes. You can see that today in the course outline, the 7th was for introduction. So basically, I'm introducing myself and the class and the syllabus. And then, since we would normally be meeting on Wednesdays at 6 o'clock, we won't have another class video until Wednesday, and that'll be on the 14th, where you are going to be where I'm going to be asking you to read from Projected Fears, the introduction. So that talks a little bit about horror cinema. And also from the text horror film, Chapter 4, What is Horror? Chapter 5, The Why of Horror? And Chapter 6, Critics and Censors. And again, if you can't necessarily have it read, don't panic, because I see this as kind of an introduction. So much so that I'm going to be showing a documentary that class as well, in addition to having us talk about those readings. And the documentary is entitled Nightmares in Red, White, and Blue, which is the documentary companion to one of the texts that I offered. So it gives you a nice overview of Gothic literature and the semester as a whole. And then on the 21st is when we begin to talk about the films themselves. And we are starting with the 1920s. What I've done is I've divided up the films by decade, that each film is a representation of the cultural anxieties of its particular decade. So in the 1920s, what we have is The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari. It's a very famous German expressionistic film that came out in 1920. And the companion readings to that are Chapter 1 in the Nightmares book about the origins of film Gothic, which is Cabinet of Dr. Caligari. And horror film chapter 1, genreification, and how do we classify genres or categories. And then for the 28th, the film that we're going to be viewing is the 1931 version of Dracula with Boris Karloff. Or I'm sorry, with Bela Lugosi. Boris Karloff was Frankenstein. Sorry about that. So Dracula 1931. And what we will be reading as the companion text to that, chapter 1 in Projected Fears, which is about Dracula. And chapter 2 in Nightmares, about the studio horrors of the 1930s, which is when Dracula came out, and most of the monster movies, Frankenstein, Dracula, Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde. As well as chapter 10, Reality Bites. They're trying to have a little bit of punning there with the vampire. And chapter 11, which is on Todd Browning, who was the director for Dracula. This is when your first journal is going to be due. On the 28th, journal number 1 on the Cabinet of Dr. Caligari. So after we've talked about the Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, after you've posted about the Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, that's when you would have your journal response due. So you can utilize all of that information. Again, I'm thinking about a page or so of questions or thoughts or responses of things we talked about or didn't talk about in class. Just to get you thinking about how the Cabinet of Dr. Caligari is important in terms of horror film and in media and popular culture. And then you can see that basically starting the 28th, every week you're going to have a journal due. So we're going to be doing basically a exchange every week where your journal will be on the film that we viewed in the previous class that I would have talked about and that you had a chance to talk about in your class discussion forum. So on the 5th, we get to talk about horror film from the 1940s, a film that perhaps is not as iconic as the Cabinet of Dr. Caligari or as well known as Dracula, and that's called Cat People. That came out in 1942, and the companion readings for that are from Nightmares, where it talks about shadow play, and horror film, where it talks about horror films from 1939 all the way to 1973. So they've compacted in a lot of information in a short period, or in a short section. And this is when your second journal will be due on the 5th, and that happens to be on Dracula. Again, about a page response or so that I evaluate on a checkmark grade, not for grammar or mechanics, but just for content. And then on the 12th is when we talk about horror film in the 1950s, a film you may or may not have heard of, Invasion of the Body Snatchers. It oftentimes is known as a science fiction film as well, so we'll talk again a little bit about genres and categories. And the companion readings for that will be from Projected Fears, Chapter 2, Thing from Another World, and Nightmares, Chapter 4, Body Snatchers. And that's when your Cat People journal will be due on the 12th. On the 19th is when we talk about horror film from the 1960s. We'll talk about the very iconic Psycho and watch Psycho. The companion readings will be from Projected Fears, Chapter 3 on Psycho, and from Nightmares, Chapter 5, California Gothic, and Chapter 12 on Alfred Hitchcock. And this is when your fourth journal will be due. And on Invasion of the Body Snatchers. And I know that I had indicated that I chose a film from each decade. This is where I cheated a little bit because I chose 2 films from the 1960s. The 1960s was a particularly turbulent time, so this is my justification for choosing 2 films from that particular period. So one is Psycho, and the other film is Night of the Living Dead, which I suspect you've probably heard of before, by George Romero, and helped to lead to the whole zombie genre. And what I am going to ask you to read is from Projected Fears, Chapter 4, about Night of the Living Dead, as well as from Nightmares, Chapter 6, about apocalyptic films, and Chapter 14, about George Romero himself. And this would be the date in which your Psycho journal is due, Journal 5. On the 2nd of November, we talk about horror films from the 1970s, the selection being The Exorcist from 1973, where the companion readings are from Projected Fears, Chapter 5, for about Exorcist, and also the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, which you might be familiar with, and also from horror film, Chapter 3, 1974 to the present. So again, they're condensing a lot of information in a short amount of space. And the 2nd of November is when Night of the Living Dead journal would be due. And then on the 9th, horror film in the 1980s, but the film that I'm assigning came out technically in 1978, so I'm cheating a little bit again. The film is called Halloween. I suspect you've heard of it, and it led to the whole slasher genre. So that's my justification for giving a film from 1978 that really helped to influence the 1980s for horror film in the 1980s. So we'll watch Halloween, and the companion readings are from Projected Fears, Chapter 6, Halloween, Nightmares, Chapter 7, Shrinking Man, and Chapter 15, John Carpenter, who is the director of Halloween. This is also when your 7th journal will be due, The Exorcist. On the 16th of November, this is horror film in the 1990s, and the film that I selected for the 1990s is The Blair Witch Project, which came out in 1999. And the companion readings are from Nightmares, Chapter 8, Postmodern Horror, and Chapter 9, Postmodern Horror 2, as we are moving into more contemporary horror pieces, as well as Chapter 9, Digital Horrors. And this is when your 8th journal will be due on Halloween. November 23rd is Thanksgiving, so there wouldn't be a meeting. On the 30th of November is when we talk about horror film in the 2000s. The film 28 Days Later that came out in 2002 by Danny Boyle. And this is when I'm asking you to read the conclusion from Projected Fears, as well as Chapter 7, Spooky Sounds, as we're sort of getting towards the ending of our semester. And journal number 9 would be due on that day about the Blair Witch Project. And then on the 7th of December, the reason why this class exists is because of the film Get Out. And once I saw that film in the theaters, I realized that I had to have a film about, or I had to have a class about horror film, and that in one way or another, I had to focus on this particular film by Jordan Peele, which came out in 2017. So this is our horror film for the 2010s. And that's the film we'll be watching. And then we will be reading in the book horror film Colors of Fear. And also we will be submitting in the 10th journal 28 days later. That leads to our last class, the 14th of December. This is when we sum up the semester. And in Nightmares, I'm going to ask you to skim just the filmography. And skim means skim, that you will see that they've got a list of important horror films from their perspective that you might be interested in. And we're also going to watch a documentary entitled Horror Noir, A History of Black Horror, a really terrific documentary that came out in 2019. So we begin and end the semester with documentaries. And the 14th is when you have your final journal, journal number 11, Get Out. And then our final class, which is Wednesday of the 21st, this is when you would hand in your final course project, if you hadn't already done so already. Obviously, if you hand in your final course project on the 21st, you don't have time for a revision. And it's also when I will post the final exam. Because we would normally be taking it at 6 o'clock on the 21st of December. And I will give you 24 hours. Again, it will be open book, open note, essay exam. So that gives you an idea of the class holistically. So I hope that gives you a sense of what it is we're going to be doing this semester. Please contact me if you've got any kind of questions or concerns at all, and I'll be happy to try to address them. The only thing that's really left is our class attendance question, which would be a class discussion forum question. And basically, if we were meeting in class, what we would do next are introductions, where we would all introduce ourselves to our classmates. So that's what I'm going to try to duplicate on our class discussion forum. I'm going to ask you to introduce yourself briefly to your classmates. Feel free to upload things like video or audio, but you're not required to. The idea is that ultimately you can get a little bit of a sense of everybody who's in the class. And as I had indicated, you're not required to respond to your classmates, but you are required to read all of their responses. Though certainly if you feel compelled to respond to any of their responses, just like you would in a live class or face-to-face class, please do so. And do read my responses as well. So again, I'll be posting again next Thursday by 6 p.m. I hope you're doing well. I'm doing well, and we will continue on next week. Take care and welcome to the class. Bye-bye.